Hey you guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today we're talking about the top 5 baits for September bass fishing. As we transition into September, there are some key baits that you want to put your time into to get consistent bites this coming month. September is a transitional month in bass fishing, much like May is on the other end of summer. If you don't know how to stay ahead of those fish in September, you can get really lost really quickly. And I think that's when a lot of anglers give up and decide to turn their attention to hunting instead because they're not catching any fish. Well, the good news is it's not hard. Once you know what's happening and you can predict that and you have some key baits, you can do extremely well in September, and then it just gets even better as we head into the fall. So the first bait that I would throw is a jerkbait. Now, I've actually got 2 baits here for you, and the reason why is even though we're doing 5 baits, there are some differences between guys that are in the northern states and the rest of the country. So, the jerkbait is a key player in September. Let me explain why. No matter where you are in the country, September is when you will start to see a change in your nighttime low temperatures. What I mean by that is that your daytime temperatures will probably stay relatively the same, but all of a sudden if you start watching the nighttime lows, you'll see some changes. You'll see it getting colder at night, even though it may not be reflected in the day. That is the part that is so hard for fishermen to understand because their daytime is the exact same, but it changed at night. As soon as those nighttime lows start to drop, the grass will start to fade. This is especially true in the middle and northern portions of the country. The moment that the surface grass starts to fade, starts to back up at all, the bass start making immediate movements. They don't wait for the grass to die. They see the writing on the wall and they start to adapt. So in the daytime, if you're out there in late August going into September, you don't immediately see any change at all. But the fish are already on the move, and that's the part that's so hard for guys to understand. Those fish will pull to remaining active live grass, or they will pull to hard structure, the structure that won't die back, rock piles, laid down wood, things like that that aren't going to change. That's where guys get lost. Now, that first bait is the jerkbait, specifically the Super Fluke. If you are in the lower 2/3 of this country, essentially if you're anywhere except a crystal clear reservoir or a crystal clear lake with very little grass, the Fluke is your bait. If there's grass in the water, whether that's surface grass or subsurface, if you've got brush in the water, if you've got a lot of wood in the water, the Super Fluke fished aggressively. Pop, 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 pause, pop, pause, pop, pop, pop. Fish it fast, part underwater, part on the surface. I'm fishing it that quickly. Will draw a strike when almost nothing else will. As we get through September, more and more bass will make that transition away from the grass and they'll start chasing they'll start chasing the bait fish and pushing them into the pockets. And they'll start ambushing that bait fish, and that will continue into the fall. When that is happening, nothing will get bit around cover better than a Super Fluke. Now, if you are in one of those other fisheries, either a highland reservoir with crystal clear water, a Great Lake situation, somewhere with very, very clear water and no grass, you are better off in that same exact situation. Everything still applies, except for you, the jerkbait is a better option. Those exposed treble hooks are a better option. And this time of year, you want a jerkbait that's got some flash to it. Now, as your water cools, we'll immediately leave those bright, hard-cutting, flashy jerkbaits and go to something more natural. But right out the gate, you want flash, you want bold, you want aggressive. This is a Jackal re-range. That's a perfect example. And then as it cools down, you might switch to something like a Megabass Vision 110. But the jerkbait on hard snaps of the rod, throwing light in the water, will get vicious strikes from fish that again are going back to being bait fish oriented. This time of year, they really key in on those smaller bait fish and they will ambush them in virtually every lake in the country. Bait number 2 is going to be a small crankbait. Emphasis on small. This little guy, the little Fat John 50, this is a bait that will run ultra shallow, 0 to 2 feet of water. It is very hard to find a crankbait that can run that shallow. But again, in September, as that grass is dying back, it's not dead yet, it is dying back, and the bass are pushing ultra shallow. These bass can be in less than 2 feet of water. They can be in less than a foot of water. They are ultra shallow and they are aggressive, especially early and late in the day. They're feeding heavily during those low light periods. That little guy right there, a crankbait that will actually run and fish aggressively in water that shallow. Because you can take a larger crankbait or a crankbait that dives deeper, throw it up there and just go really slow. But that's not a good presentation. A little guy like this that matches the size of the bait fish and that you can go super fast with and just burn it and pause, burn, pause, burn, pause. A bait that will do that will get bit when nothing else will up there in that shallow water. Some days they just don't want to come to the surface. A lot of days they do. But on the days they don't, that crankbait will be key. Now again, if you're in that fishery that doesn't have so much of that grass, there are things that are just slightly different. Still the tiny crankbait. But look at this guy. That's the little Megabass Z2. That little tiny guy right there, still a micro crank, but he will actually dive down. So if you don't have grass to worry about, your fish tend to not sit as shallow. They tend not to be in a foot of water. They'll be in 2 to 5 feet of water, 2 to 6 feet of water. They'll still corral bait into pockets. They'll still be pushed back in coves. They're starting that transition, but that guy will let you reach a little bit deeper, but still it's the right size to chase those bait fish, or to match those bait fish and to chase those bass around. Now, next up is a topwater. And it doesn't matter if you are in the northern states, the southern states, somewhere in the middle. If I can only have one topwater that time of year, it is a walking bait. And again, I will link the exact baits down in the video description. For each category, favorite baits, favorite colors, all of that for you. If you need to upgrade hooks, anything like that, we'll tell you that as well. But no matter where you are, a walking bait is a critical bait as we go into this early fall transition. Something about that bait covering water. I don't know if you've ever seen a bait fish up on the surface feeding. I never understood why a walking bait was such a big deal until I saw it with my own eyes. When a bait fish gets up on the surface to feed and there's not a bass around, they don't feel intimidated. They actually do this wandering pattern on the surface looking for food. That is what they do. The walking bait does an amazing job of imitating that. The other thing about a walking bait is these fish are transitioning back to being keyed in on bait fish. They're transitioning back to chasing their food as that water begins to cool down. But it's not a full transition yet. So I think that that slower moving walking bait, because it's covering a lot of water without moving forward, gives those fish more time to hunt it down, as opposed to a buzz bait or a whopper plopper, any other bait that's running in a straight line, I personally like that walking bait this time of year. I think that's a key player. Next up is the underspin. Now again, we have a little bit of a break here, but the main bait, the bulk of the country, you want a full size underspin. 4.3 or 4.8 inch Kitech trailer on a 3/8 to a 1/2 ounce head. That underspin right there can do almost anything. It's light enough that I can throw it shallow and fish it quickly. It's heavy enough that if I get a truly cold night and those bait fish back down and the bass back down with them, that I can get on outside corners, on outside rock, and I can target those fish as well. Because I've so far put all of our attention into the shallow fish. There are still some fish that prefer to be out deep. And this is a crossover bait that will catch both groups of fish. The reason why, ooh, we've got some wind coming. The reason why all my attention has been on the shallow fish is because right now they're the easiest fish to catch and they're the most fun. They're willing to come right up in the shallows, eat on the surface, chase a fluke, chase a topwater, crush a crankbait. They're just fun to fish for. But if you need to adapt, the underspin is key. That blade is key this time of year because again, it's becoming bait fish oriented again. The bait fish in the fall are schooled up and that blade makes you stand out from the crowd. If you're throwing a bare swim bait versus an underspin, the underspin will almost always win. And that's coming from a guy whose namesake is a bait that doesn't have a blade. Right now is when I stop throwing my own swim bait head and throw an underspin. It makes that much of a difference. If you are a northern guy or a reservoir guy or a clear water guy, same exact rules apply, but it's time to downsize that offering. This little guy, that's the Cool Baits 1/8 ounce head. Tiny little guy, still an underspin with either a Kitech 2.8 or that guy right there, the 4-inch Easy Shiner. That setup is ultra finessey and will get bit when nothing else will. If you just plain need a bite, tie that 1/8 ounce on, tie it on with light line, 6 pound, 7 pound line on a spinning rod. You can throw it ultra shallow and fish it like a spinnerbait, or you can fish it out deeper and you just go super slow. Just let it crawl across the bottom, actually making bottom contact the whole time. Just creep along the bottom and those fish will just come up and tick it. But that is the bait in September where if you cannot get a bite and you need a bite, I go right there every single time. Now last but not least is the one that has nothing to do with bait fish whatsoever. Not every fishery is bait fish oriented. 99% of them are, but every once in a while you'll get that one that isn't. But either way, the jig should be a major player for you through the entire fall, and that starts right now. As that grass dies back, we've already talked about that in the video. As it dies back, I said right out the gate that those fish make an immediate transition. Where do they go? They go to that hard structure. They go to rock, they go to wood, they go to dock pilings, they go to lay down trees. They go to the things that aren't changing. The jig is my immediate turn to. We, over the years, have done some amazing jig videos and some amazing jig fishing in September. And the reason why is that a place like this could all be a mega grass flat. Just a huge grass expanse, and you don't even know where to begin in August. But come September, that grass starts to die back. Those fish make an instant transition, and now there may be 15 pieces of wood in that same 300 acres. And all those fish will pull straight to them. And now, instead of standing there looking at acres on acres on acres, wondering what I'm supposed to do, I have 15 key targets that I know are holding the fish, and I can take a jig and I can put it right in there on target and start catching those fish. This is the time of year where a pitching style jig, a jig that will fish well in wood, is going to be a major player. Take it straight to the hardwood, fish dead in the center of that stuff, fish those laydowns, pitch every dock piling, and you will catch fish this month. Those fish are there. Now, last little adaptation is if you're a Highland Reservoir guy. Same rules still apply, but throwing that great big jig isn't always viable. For you, just face it, don't fish in the middle, downsize it all the way. Go to something like that little tiny Kitech jig. Go to lighter line, stay with a trailer that will kick, that will draw some interest from the fish. It'll have some movement because the jig itself is so small that you want to give it a little bit of action. So I use a pack a chunk in there or one of the other kicking style trailers and fish that instead of throwing a full-size jig. Fish it on lighter line. Fish it on 10, maximum 12-pound line, and you'll get more bites in that clear water. Something about a jig, whether it's a little jig or a big jig, will still get a big bite. But if you're in a place with a lot of cover, you don't want to throw that little guy. You'll get bent out and broken off all day long. You want a full-size jig. But if you're in that clear water reservoir and those fish are sitting on that rock or sitting on the occasional laydown, you can fish the outside ends of that stuff, take that little tiny finesse jig, lighten that line up, and get those bites. September, if you're on your own, can be a confusing month. But once you understand these details, it's a fantastic time to be on the water. It's a blast because if you read through what I was saying, the moral of the story is the fish become predictable again. They're no longer everywhere. They start tightening back up into schools. They start bunching up on cover. They start transitioning back into pockets. They're where you think they are instead of being all over the place. And once you understand that, you're not wasting time fishing all over. You're running key targets and you will catch more fish. I hope you guys have a blast out there this month. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.